Alright, just gonna do a sound check. A moment. Alright, so just gonna continue in the CSS tutorials. Step 49. You've learned a few ways to set flat colors in CSS, but you can also use color transition or gradient on an element. A gradient is when one color transitions into another. The CSS linear gradient function lets you control the direction of the transition along a line in which colors are used. One thing to remember is that the linear gradient function actually creates an image element and is usually paired with the background property, which can accept an image as a value. Alright, so I guess this is another way of representing a color. In the red CSS rule, so that's right here, change the background color property to background. It just says to background. So I think this is what you would do. Oh, okay. I think that's what it's asking for. So it's saying you would get rid of, okay, so it's saying you would get rid of the color part and put this in. So, so when you do it this way, you can accept more than a color. You can also put an image in there and more information. So step 50, the linear gradient function is very flexible. Here's the basic syntax you'll use in this tutorial. So this is what the code will look like. Gradient direction is the direction of the line used for the transition. Doesn't really describe what that means at first. Color 1 and color 2 are the arguments. So color 1, color 2, which are colors to be used in the transition itself. These go from any type of color, including color keywords, so any way of representing a color, essentially. So I think what they're saying is it'll transition from one color to the next, and you can decide exactly how that effect will happen. Now you'll apply a red to green gradient along a 90-degree line to the first marker. Alright, so first in the CS.red CSS rule, set the background property to linear gradient and pass it the value 90 degrees as a gradient direction. Alright, so first in the red CSS rule, set the background property to linear gradient. Alright, so this is going to be the gradient direction. Okay, doesn't say anything else. So it just says the gradient direction. And okay, so you'll use the RGB function for the colors of this gradient. And the linear gradient function, use the RGB function to set the first color argument to pure red. Okay, so again, how do we do that? RGB function. How are we going to make it purely red? We don't need to memorize it. We just say it's going to be full of red, none of green, and none of blue, because it's red. So now we have the first color, and in the same linear gradient function, use the RGB function to set the second color to pure green. So RGB, I'm going to set that to pure green, so it's going to be none of red, none of blue, and all of green. Oh, I messed up. RGB. So it's like, okay, so I messed it up a little bit. So it's going to be none of red, it's going to be all of green, because it's pure green, and none of blue, because it's RGB. So that works. Hello, double X, as in chat. Okay, so this is the effect it'll make allegedly. So this is kind of the effect it'll make. So it's, as you see, it goes from red to green. So as you can see, the linear gradient function produces a smooth red-green gradient. While the linear gradient function needs a minimum of 2 color arguments to work, it can accept many color arguments. Use the RGB function to add pure blue as the third color argument. So there's 2 colors we have in there, so we're going to add another color. So what does it want? Pure blue. So that's going to be RGB. So it's going to be RGB. It's going to be none of red, none of green, and all of blue. So now, what you can see is it goes from red to green to blue. Alright, let's go past this. Color stops. Color stops allow you to fine-tune where colors are placed along the gradient line. There are length units like px or percentages that allow, so px stands for pixels or percentages that follow a color in the linear gradient function. For example, in this red-black gradient, the transition from red to black takes place at the 90% point along the gradient line, so red takes up the most available space. Alright, so trying to understand that. That's the code for that. I'm trying to multitask. One sec. So in the linear gradient function, add a 75% color stop after the first red color argument. Do not add color stops to the other color arguments. Okay. So in the linear gradient function, add a 75% color stop after the first red color argument. So would I put this here? So yeah, so I'm learning with the tutorials, so you know, I'm gonna find out the same way. Okay, so there's no comma in between. Alright, so just trying to make sense of this. A 75% color stop after the first red color argument. Do not add color stops to the other color arguments. Yep. So that's what I can understand is it means that red will actually cover 75% of that linear gradient right there. So if we were to make that, let's say 33%, that would be a third. Now it's a third. Make it 20%, now it's 20%. Could make it 90%. Could make it 99%. But they want us to make it 75%. Step 55. Now that you know the basics of how the linear gradient function and color stops work, you can use them to make the markers look more realistic. In the linear gradient function, set gradient direction to 180 degrees. Okay. So we're going to first kind of learn about this property. Did we do it right? So we'll see the change from 90 to 100. So I think what I'm seeing is if it was 90, it would be coming from that other direction, but now as it's 180 degrees, it seems to be coming from the top-down direction, where now it's coming top-down from 25%. So that's the gradient direction. Before, we should make it 75%, and now it's 75% from top to bottom. So it's like this is 75%. Step 56. Next, set the color stop for red to 0%. So the color stop to red to 0%. Okay. Now for green, there's no comma, and it's going to be 50%. And for blue, it's going to be 100%. Trying to make sense of this. I'm actually just gonna do something real quick. So the code checks out. Yeah. Now that the color stops are set, you'll apply different shades of red to each color argument in the linear gradient function. The shades on the top and bottom edges of the marker will be darker, while the one in the middle will be lighter, as if there is a light above it. For the first color argument, which is currently pure red, update the RGB function so that the value is 122. So as far as it's currently pure red, so that's the full 255 of red. So they want to change that to 122 to make it not full red, but kind of a toned down red. So as you can see, it's a lot darker version of a red. And for green, instead of a full 255 of green, they want it to be toned down to 74. And for blue, they don't want to add a full 255, they're going to go all the way down to 14. Oh, okay. I think I actually misunderstood the directions. For the first color argument, currently that's at pure red, update the RGB function so that the value for red just in this argument is for 122, and then for green it's 74, and for this is 14. So they wanted, yep. So I think what I thought was they just wanted me to tone down the colors, but that's not what they wanted me to do. Now step 58. Now modify the second color argument and the linear gradient function, which is currently pure green. Update the RGB function so the value for red is 245. Okay, so the value for red is... Okay, so this is the value of the one that's at pure green. So that's this one. So we're going to set that. The one for red is 245. For green, they want that to be 62. So it's a lot more red than green now. And for blue, they want that to be 113. So it says, congratulations, the code passes. So it's kind of like with gradients, you get kind of this effect, this color effect right here. Finally, modify the third color argument in the linear gradient function, which is currently pure blue. So the one that's at pure blue, that's this one. And they want the value for red to be 162. They want the value for green to be 27. They want the value for blue to be also 27. It says, congratulations, code passes. So now we got this kind of color, this kind of effect. The red marker is looking much more realistic. Now you'll do the same for the green marker, using a combination of the linear gradient function and hexadecimal colors. In the dot green CSS rule, change the background color property to background. Alright, so we're just going to get rid of the color part. And that should be it for that step. For the marker, you use hexadecimal color codes for your gradient. Use the linear gradient function and set gradient direction at 180 degrees. Okay. This marker use so we're working on green here. Hold on. For this marker, you'll use hexadecimal color codes for your gradient. Use a linear gradient function and set gradient direction to 180 degrees. Alright, let's just start typing it in. So the gradient direction, it's going to be 180 degrees. The first color argument is going to be... Okay, so it's hexadecimal. So if you remember hexadecimal code, it's think of a hexagon. It's 6. It has a number 6 and 6 there. So if you notice, it's going to be some kind of number. First it's gonna have the pound sign, but it's gonna have 55680D. So this is a hexadecimal number, has six digits, but it's actually base 16. Actually, I just want to make sure. Hold on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A. Wait, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A, B, C, D, E, F. Yep, that's 16. So the code did pass. For the second color argument, use a hexadecimal color code with the values 71 for red. So this is another color. So it's going to be 71 for red. It's going to be F5 for green. And 3E for blue. So it's kind of like using the RGB wheel, only it's this much of red, so it's this much of red, it's this much of blue. No, it's okay. It's RGB, so it's this much of red, this much of green, and this much of blue. Just being represented another way. So that code passes. 63. That's looking better, but the bottom edge of the green marker needs to be darker to add a little more dimension. And the same linear gradient function, add a hex color code. Hold on. So I think it's just asking me to add another color. So 11, 6C. $31. So what I wanted us to do. Saying, not sure what oh, it's out of the parentheses. That should be it. Okay, so it passed. Step number 64. Even without the color stops, you might have noticed that the colors for the green marker transition at the same points as a red marker. The first color is at the start 0%, the second is the middle 50%, and the last is 100%. So that's this one. Linear gradient function automatically calculates these values for you and places colors evenly among the gradient line by default. In the red CSS rule, remove the 3 color stops from the linear gradient function to clean up your code a bit. So we're gonna remove the 3 color stops. Okay, so this is a color stop, and this is a color stop, and they're saying they want this removed, and this is a color stop. So I think that's what they wanted us to do. Alright, so the code did pass. Step 65. If no gradient direction argument is provided to the linear gradient, it arranges the colors from top to bottom or along a 180 degree line by default. So if you remember, when we did it 90, it went from left to right. But when we made it 180, it went from top to down. Clean up your code a little more by removing the gradient direction argument from both the linear gradient functions. So we're removing this, and we're removing this. And what they're saying is, by cleaning it up, is remove unnecessary code, because if we're setting it at 180 degrees, and that's already the default, then it doesn't need to be said that it's 180 degrees, because the default is already 180 degrees. So that should have been what they wanted us to do. Alright, passed. Step 66. Now you'll apply a gradient to the blue marker, this time using the HSL function as color arguments. So I think we're just getting rid of this. Oh. Trying to backspace. Select code passed. 67. Using the linear gradient function and pass in the HSL function with the values. Use a linear gradient function? Okay. So do they want me to remove this? Or I think they want me to change it. Okay, so I think they're saying put the linear gradient Okay, I think I know what they're saying. So instead of, so just like this, you would input colors. This is another way to represent a color. So you're inputting this representation of colors within this function of representation of gradients. Okay, so that is what I wanted. Alright. So it's basically like saying, we're just throwing in one color in this. Only we're representing that in a different way. as a second color argument, pass in the HSL function. So it's a HSL function with the values 223, then 90%, and 60%. Should be what they wanted us to do. So it's basically like we're just throwing in colors just like for this one. Just different representations of it. So step 69, as a third color argument, pass on the HSL function within the values 240. Okay, so this is a third color. It's going to be 240, 56%, and 42%. Now that the markers have the correct colors, it's time to build the marker sleeves. Start with the red marker. Inside the red marker div, create a new div and give it a class of sleeve. So inside the red marker div, create a new div. Okay, so let's just create the new div. So a way to think of it is it's going to be nested within that div. And we're going to assign it a class that has not been created yet. Sleeve, that should be what they wanted us to do. The code passes, indicating that it was. Create a new CSS rule that targets a class sleeve. Set the width property to 200 pixels. Set the height property to 25 pixels. Set the margin to 10 pixels. And auto means centered. So what they wanted us to do? Oh, 110. 110. I thought they said. Set the width property to 110. The height property to 25. Oh, and they didn't say anything about the margin. Okay. To make the marker look more realistic, give the sleeve transparent white color. First, set the sleeve's elements background color to white. So I'll just set it to white. I could do this in other ways, other representations, but I could also just say white. So opacity describes how, I think the word how to pronounce it is opaque. Let me make sure of how to pronounce this word right.
Opaque. 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 Opaque.
So it's pronounced opaque. Opaque. Or non-transparent. Something is. For example, a solid wall is opaque and no light can pass through, but a drinking glass is much more transparent. It's kind of like a question: you can see through it or not. You can see through glass. You can't see through a wall, and you can see through the glass on the other side. With the CSS opacity property, you can control how opaque or transparent an element is. With a value 0 or 0%, the element will be completely transparent, so you'll be able to see through it completely. And at 1.0, so 1.0 as a decimal means 100%, it'll be completely like a wall, like a color wall. So in the sleeve CSS rule, set the opacity property to 0.5, so that should be 50%. So we're going to see this div be colored at 50%. So right here you can see well, I'm trying to show an example. So right now you can see this part, this section right here, you can basically halfway see through it. Where let's say we did make it 1.0, what would it look like? You can't even see it at all because it's 100% transparent. Let's make it 0.99. If you can kind of see a faint a little bit. Then you can kind of start seeing it. So that's right here. This is 0.8, 0.7, 0.6. So this is that they wanted at 0.5. I'll make it 0.5 just so it'll pass the test. But I think you can just say 0.5, but I think there's some kind of reason to have the 0 there. So congratulations, code passes. Let's now run step 74. So I think now we only have 20 done in this module that we need to do. So we were at around, I think, 49 before, so now we're already more than most of the way done. So we started here, and now we're here. So, hopefully we can get to at least 80, or maybe to 94. Alright, so step 74, another way to set the opacity property, the opacity for an element is with the alpha channel. Similar to the opacity property, the alpha channel controls how transparent or opaque a color is. You've already set sleeves opacity with the named color and the opacity property, but you can add an alpha channel to the other CSS color properties. Inside the .sleeve rule, remove the opacity property and value. So they want us to remove this. I think what they're going to have us do is replace it with doing it another way. So that passed. You're already familiar with using the RGB function to set colors. To add an alpha channel to an RGB color, use the RGBA function instead. The RGBA function works just like the RGB function, but it takes one more number from 0 to 1.0 for the alpha channel. Okay. So this is another representation, another way to create transparent elements, transparent colors. So what they want us to do in the sleeve rule, use the RGBA function to set the background color to pure white. So RGBA, that's what it's called. So for RGB, how do we set it? What happens if we set it to 0, 0? What happens if we set it to 255, 255? That should be all of one color. So I believe it's 0, 0, 0. It's zeroed out to be white. And I think that's what they wanted us to do. One moment. I'm actually going to end the stream and then resume at a later time.